You know, when you think of pioneers crossing the Sierra Nevada, one name usually pops into your head: Donner. It's a story of absolute tragedy, but we're going to talk about a different story today. One about quiet competence and incredible success that, honestly, history just kind of forgot. Okay, let's get into it. I mean, that story is infamous, right? In the winter of 1846, the Donner Reed Party gets trapped by snow in the Sierra Nevada, and what happened next has become this chilling, cautionary tale of westward expansion. It's the story we all think we know when we talk about those mountains. But what if I told you that just 2 years before the Donner disaster, a different group, the Stephens-Townsend-Murphy Party, tackled that exact same mountain pass? They had wagons, women, children, and they did it in the snow. And get this, not only did they all survive, they actually had more people when they got to California than when they started. Kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? So, to figure that out, you gotta meet the leader, a man whose name really should be up there with the greats, but has been mostly lost to time: Elisha Stephens. See, Stephens wasn't some farmer looking for a fresh start. By 1844, he was in his 40s and already a seasoned veteran of the wilderness. We're talking more than 2 decades as a mountain man, a beaver trapper. This guy could look at a mountain range and just know the best way over it. He could read the clouds, manage livestock, find food where anyone else would starve. This was deep, practical knowledge, the kind of mountain smarts you just can't learn from a book. And here's the kicker, the other piece of the puzzle that made him so perfect for the job. He was also a blacksmith. Now, think about that for a second. You're on a 2,000-mile trek, and your wagon is literally everything. Who would you rather have leading the way? Some rich guy with a map, or the one person who can actually forge a new axle when yours snaps in half in the middle of a desert? This combo of wilderness savvy and hands-on engineering skill was just priceless. And you know what? The people in his party, they saw it. They elected him captain for one reason and one reason alone. He was the most competent person for the job. Period. It wasn't about money or status. They knew their lives were on the line, and they put their complete trust in him. That kind of trust, that unity, that was their secret weapon. And that leadership, that trust, was about to face its ultimate test. Because after months on the trail, the Stephens-Townsend-Murphy Party finally stood before the great, looming wall of the Sierra Nevada. Okay, so picture this. They get to this barren place called the Humboldt Sink. Now, this is where every single party before them had to give up and ditch their wagons. It was the end of the road. But then, something amazing happens. A Paiute chief, a man they came to call Truckee, came to their camp, and with drawings in the sand, he told them about a river that could lead them to a pass through the mountains. So, this is it. This is the moment where everything could go right or horribly wrong. Stephens had a choice. Does he stick with what everyone knows, that wagons can't go any further? Or does he trust the local intelligence of a man who actually lives in this land? Stephens made the call. He trusted Chief Truckee. It was an absolutely brilliant decision, and by doing so, he didn't just save his party, he blazed the trail that would become the main highway into California. They even named the river after the chief, the Truckee River, to honor him. But, okay, finding the path is one thing. Getting over it is a whole other ballgame. The snow was already up to the oxen's chests when they hit a dead end, a 10-foot-high sheer wall of granite. It looked totally impossible. But this is where Stephens, the blacksmith and engineer, took over. They spotted a tiny crack in the rock, just big enough for one ox at a time. So they guided the animals through it, chained them all together at the top, and then started this unbelievable process. They took the wagons apart, piece by piece. And while the men below heaved the parts up, the oxen above pulled. They literally hoisted their entire lives up that cliff. It was just an incredible feat of pure grit and genius. So what was the result of all that incredible skill, that trust, that backbreaking work? 0. That's how many people they lost on the entire 2,000-mile trip. In fact, like I said, 2 babies were born along the way. They showed up in California bigger than when they left. It is an absolutely mind-blowing achievement. And to really get just how amazing this was, you have to put it right next to the party that came through just 2 years later. The difference is just a masterclass in leadership. This right here, this comparison tells the whole story. Look, it wasn't just a string of bad luck that doomed the Donner Reed Party. It was a total breakdown of leadership. Where the Stephens-Townsend-Murphy Party was united behind a guy they trusted, the Donner Reed Party was just a mess of infighting. One group listened to local expertise, the other gambled on a rumor about a shortcut. You can draw a straight line from those different choices to the outcomes. One led to 100% survival, and the other, well, it led to one of the darkest chapters in American history. So what happens to a guy like this, the man who pulls off this impossible feat? Stephens' life after he blazed that trail was every bit as interesting as the man himself. Well, first, he served as a blacksmith during the Mexican-American War. Then he decided to settle down. Well, his version of it anyway. He got 160 acres down in the Santa Clara Valley, near modern-day Cupertino, and started a homestead he called, get this, Blackberry Farm. Yep, right in the heart of what would become Silicon Valley, this old mountain man was a respected farmer. But yeah, he was never going to be your typical farmer. He lived alone, and he kept that wild spirit. When someone asked him what his favorite food was, he famously said that fried rattlesnakes beat frogs all to pieces. I mean, that tells you everything you need to know about the guy, right? Totally marched to the beat of his own drum. And in the end, civilization just couldn't tame him. By 1862, the Santa Clara Valley started to get a little too crowded for his taste. So he sold his successful farm, packed his bags, and headed for the wilderness of Kern River country. His reason? The place had gotten too darn civilized. That's about as mountain man as it gets, folks. And that, right there, leads us to the biggest, craziest irony of his whole story. This man pulled off one of the most important feats in westward expansion. And for more than a century, Elisha Stephens was basically a footnote in the history he made. So let's break this down because this is just wild. In November 1844, Elisha Stephens and his party are the first to get wagons over this pass. A full year later, the famous explorer John C. Fremont comes through the exact same pass. But because Fremont was this well-known political guy who was great at PR, he gets all the credit for discovering it. Stephens himself, pretty bitterly, later said that Fremont had found the trail he'd already made. And we're not talking about some dusty old trail in the middle of nowhere. The route that Stephens pioneered, that became the main highway for the gold rush. Then it became the path for the Transcontinental Railroad. And today, it's the corridor for Interstate 80, the massive highway that takes millions of us over the Sierra every single year. We are literally driving on the ghost of the trail Elisha Stephens blazed. For over 100 years, the man who opened California was buried in an unmarked grave. But slowly, thankfully, that's starting to change. In 1994, the peak that looms over the very pass he conquered was officially named Mount Stephens. His gravesite was finally found and given a proper historical marker. And if you're ever in Silicon Valley, you'll see his name, often misspelled as Stephens with a V, on creeks and boulevards near his old Blackberry Farm. The quiet hero is finally getting his due. The story of Elisha Stephens isn't flashy. It's about skill, good judgment, and hard-won success. So why do we as a culture seem to remember the stories of spectacular, horrifying failure so much more clearly than the stories of quiet, life-saving competence?
This biographical sketch is brought to you by the Sunnyvale Historical Society and Museum Association. For over 70 years, bringing history to life through the stories of westward-bound pioneers. And History Expeditions, faithfully retracing the steps of America's most notable trailblazers over the Sierra Nevada.